Grace received word that she had been granted safe passage to England to plead her case. In the spring of 1595, she embarked on the most important voyage of her life. The long war with Bingham had taken its toll. She was now in her early 60s, the same age as Elizabeth.
For somebody like Gráinne Mhaol with a long record of disloyal activities, to go boldly into the lion's den, really she took the ultimate risk. She could quite easily have ended up in the Tower of London or on a gibbet along by the Thames where they hung pirates. She would actually have seen the skeletons of pirates because they hung in chains along the Thames to warn other people against piracy.
But Grace also knew that pirates such as herself could be quite useful to Elizabeth, who had built her empire on the backs of these freelancers of the sea.
Don't forget, from Elizabeth's point of view, she was supporting what we would call real pirates. I mean, Drake and Hawkins and all that lot were pirates according to the Spanish. The Queen funded them and affected to be offended when it was suggested that they were up to piracy, but she knew damn well what they were up to. So she had a very good insight into people of that sort and that ilk. So I think she would have had a very shrewd notion of the sort of person that Grace was. So I think she would have been entertained to meet her. I think it would have surprised her that she was a woman.
Grace sailed up the Thames to Greenwich, the Queen's opulent summer palace downstream from London. Word of her arrival would have spread like fire throughout the Queen's court. The infamous pirate woman had come to meet their Queen.
A court is really a cauldron of gossip. And something as unusual as Grace visiting, which didn't happen every day by any means, that would certainly have caused a great stir. To many she'd be an ogre, and all her foul deeds would have been magnified, and so a lot of people would almost treat her as sort of mass murderess or an extreme criminal. So I think the local people would have been very, very keen to get a glimpse of her, to see what this particular person would be like.
As Grace arrived in the strange gilded world of Greenwich, all the eyes of the Queen's court and all the hopes of the people of County Mayo were on her.
Legend would like us to believe that Grace O'Malley sailed up the Thames all guns blazing and demanded an audience with Elizabeth as an equal queen. But with all the damning evidence against her as a rebel and a pirate, Grace knew that this would be a shortcut to the Tower of London. She was in enemy territory, and she would have to play by Elizabeth's rules.
Now, when she got to the court, you did not just go storming in. There was a protocol. So Grace sent in a petition, and in this petition she asked the Queen basically for protection against Elizabeth's own military men, particularly Bingham. She tells her of the terrible time she has had under Bingham's rule. She tells her of all the misery that herself and her family have endured. And it's there she gives detailed account of the death of her eldest son, blaming, of course, Bingham.
But few people in Greenwich would have bet on the Queen undermining her own man in Ireland. Grace's only chance was to convince Elizabeth to do just that, to call off her dogs and overrule Sir Richard Bingham. Grace probably spent weeks cooling her heels in grimy sailors' quarters along the docks of Greenwich, answering nitpicky questions from the Queen's bureaucrats and waiting for Elizabeth to fit her in. But when the day finally came, Grace made an entrance worthy of a visiting monarch. From the accounts of the court secretary,
When she came before Elizabeth, Grace had the audacity not to bow down as her subject, but to hold her head high, as though she were the Queen's equal.
For the courtiers who were present at the time, there could scarcely have been a greater offence given by somebody who's coming up and treating the Queen as an equal. The only people who do not give deference to sovereigns are other sovereigns. I can imagine a sort of collective gasp or sucking in of breath at this effrontery.
Although it wasn't in Elizabeth's nature to give much away, there's no doubt that these two formidable women saw eye to eye. Retiring to sit by the fire, they chatted like two old ladies about their parallel lives and about having to overcome the jealousies of powerful and petty men.
Queen Elizabeth was at the apex of her rule. She was trumpeted as the commander of armies and the emperor of the seas, even though she had never stepped foot on a battlefield, nor sailed further down the Thames than Greenwich. Grace's stories must have fascinated Elizabeth, because here was a woman who had actually done all these things. The two women who had led such different lives but had so much in common hit it off, and a deal was struck.
Elizabeth ordered that all charges against Grace and her family be dropped, although Grace did admit to attacking her own son's castle, a deed which impressed Elizabeth to no end.
Grace returned to Clew Bay, in many respects a triumphant woman. The Queen had granted her all she had asked for. Her family was pardoned of all charges of treason and rebellion against the Crown, and their lands recognized by royal decree.